Good evening, folks. Welcome to Practical Farmers of Iowa's Farminar. We're going to have a great night tonight, and I'm so glad you're all here. I don't know how the weather's doing where you're living, but in Iowa we're starting to get some precipitation and some snow, so I know farmers all across the country are excited about a little bit of moisture. Maybe not as important for the high tunnel growers out there or within the high tunnel, but regardless, still very exciting in this drought season, in this drought year that we've been experiencing. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here to join us. Please put your name and email and where you're from, and if you're a farmer or what your occupation is in the chat box so we can all see and learn from everyone else that's here with us. And do fill out that viewer count in the upper right corner. That's how we help figure out how many folks are with us tonight, and we can report that to folks that make it possible for us to pay our farmers for sharing their knowledge and time. Glad to have you all with us, and the purpose of being here, of course, is that you all care about the continuity of farming economies around the country, and you want farmers to be successful. Maybe you're a farmer yourself, or maybe you're learning how to help other farmers, and we're all in this together. It's a lifelong process and pursuit of profitability, and as well as stewardship and sustainability, and all indicators. So we're very glad to have you all with us in this pursuit. And to make a quick note here, I wanted to say that we've always had great support from longtime members of Practical Farmers of Iowa, including the Vic and Cindy Madsen family near Audubon County. And very glad to have Vic on the call with us tonight. So very giving a shout out, if you will, to my friend Vic Madsen. This is a photo from his front yard, and so I'm very glad to have him with us. And all members of Practical Farmers of Iowa are very grateful for your input and helping make sure our programming is meeting your needs. So keep us on over the fire, keep our feet on the fire, and keep us working hard for you. Thank you so much for your support as a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa. We're all here because we care about the next generation. Maybe we're beginning farmers ourselves, or we're looking down the road someday to make sure we have a vibrant farm community around us. So we can all learn from each other. Let's get started. As you can see, the Winter Farminar series is about halfway through now, and we'd love to have you continue to join us each Tuesday night from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central Time. Next week, we're going to have a great session on looking at year-round employment options. You know, are you looking to scale up over the years and have full-time employees 12 months a year? Really interesting discussion next week with Pete's Greens from Vermont. You're looking to cut feed costs with your swine operation. We're going to talk about alternatives and different feed rations you can look at, as well as finishing up the year with a grass-based genetics discussion from different grazer farmers, and a irrigation session, which is going to definitely be very relevant. Learn the basics of how to do vegetable farming irrigation. So we hope you can join us to all of those that are relevant to your farm and life, and let us know what you'd like to see for next year. We'll be sending out a survey after this Farminar tonight, so please do be forthcoming and sharing your speaker requests or your topic requests, and we can have those ready for you in the fall or winter of next year for a new season of Farminar's online learning with farmers as the experts. We'd love you to be a member of Practical Farmers of Iowa, so please do join tonight, practicalfarmers.org/join. You can click on that link right on your screen. Just $20 a year for students, a great value, as even if you're a whole farm member of $50 a year, you can see great discounts to our events, be they online or on farms or at our annual conference. We do about 90 events a year to help farmers learn from each other, and about half of our funding goes to our cooperators program, which I'll talk about a little bit tonight. Our cooperators meeting is coming up on February 7th and 8th, and all members are encouraged to attend and are invited to attend the Thursday from noon to 9 p.m. It's a day-long event to learn about our farmer-to-farmer on-farm research program called the Cooperators Program. It's a way to give farmers a chance to get practical answers to questions that they have about on-farm challenges through research, record-keeping, and demonstration projects. The Cooperators Program began in 1987, way back in 1987, with farmers looking to save money through more judicious use of inputs. They figured out they could cut their inputs for nitrogen by about 20% in some fields. So very interesting research that farmers are the experts, and farmers are choosing what gets studied. So please, if you're interested to attend, take a minute and send an email to Tomoko, one of our staff members, and we'd be glad to help connect you with this great opportunity to learn from other master farmer researchers. So another opportunity to join Practical Farmers of Iowa and get great benefits. We have so many great members now, about 1,000 memberships and 2,000 individuals, and we'd love to have you be a member as well. Finally, if you are looking for more paid on-the-job training, our Labor for Learning program might be for you. You could get selected from one of these 10 member farms across the state, as you can see here. There's 10 different farms that are participating of all different enterprises, and they're looking to hire. So if you're really eager to learn and want to learn all the business sides of farming, want to get some paid on-the-job training, please do apply at those farms, practicalfarmers.org/labor for learning. Right there on the screen, you can apply, and if you get hired, you can get a bunch of great benefits to be in that program as well, including a sizable discount to our annual conference next January, as well as paid time off during the term of employment to attend a PFI event. It's another great way to learn from farmers. All right, Adam, that's my spiel. Let's I'll get your slideshow pulled up here, and let's talk about making money in high tunnels. I'm not hearing you yet, Adam.
All right, how's everybody doing?
There you go. Go ahead.
You hear me now? Is that good?
Yep.
We're all set? All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Unlike what Luke said, greetings from balmy Michigan. We're 55 degrees right now, and it's been raining like crazy all day long. So I don't know. I used to live in Portland, and I kind of feel like that's where I am right now. So I guess we'll see what happens. It's supposed to be 19 tomorrow night, so ups and downs continue. So like Luke said, thank you guys for having me. I'll put a plug in also that we're Practical Farmers of Iowa members, and it's a great thing even if you are, out of state as well. So, we get out to Iowa and some of their events as well each year and enjoy it. So, and it's just a great community also to be able to be a part of, and lots of people to learn from and lots of people that know what's going on. So, tonight we're going to be talking about, economics of high tunnel production. I'm going to shoot for this, end sometime between 8:45 and 9, and then have some time there, for some questions along the way, or some questions at the end. We'll try to answer some along the way as well, depending on how they come up. I always have a hard time reading the questions in the chat box and trying to remember where I'm at and what I'm talking about. So we'll do as we can and make sure that we definitely have some time there at the end of the session also. Right, it's Central Time. I'm on Eastern, so we won't keep you that long. So again, I'm Adam Montri, and I've got Laura Haselhoon's name here as well. She's not here with me, but she is a colleague of mine that I work really closely with that she's hired in to work about a year and a half ago to work on a lot of the economics of high tunnels with a lot of the farmers that we work with. So she definitely has contributed to this presentation and kind of moved us to the next step of how we're thinking about tunnel economics. So just so you guys kind of get an idea of where I'm coming from. So I work part-time at Michigan State in the horticulture department with the student organic farm. And so my position there is to work directly with farmers on a couple different loan programs around hoop houses and high tunnels. And then we farm at home as well, my wife and I and family, and we have some hired labor in the spring, summer, and fall. So here's a picture from part of our farm. Right now we've got 3 30 by 96 foot tunnels that we built last fall. And before that we had a 34 by 96, which we still have, and then we have a 26 by 48 foot movable. So we've got 5 tunnels, about 13,000 square feet of production under tunnels, and then we have outdoor space as well. So not a whole lot, so probably another acre on top of that tunnel. So there's, not quite acre and a half or so put together with the tunnels and our outdoor space. We market mostly through restaurants. We've got, 4 that buy consistently from us, 2 times a week. That probably, 80 to 90% of our volume moves through them. And then we do one small community-based farmers market that's about 2 miles from our house that's not necessarily economically viable if it was only thing that we did, but it also adds, our contribution to our community, and we make enough money there that it pays our labor in the summer. So that's the way we kind of look at it, and then we, mostly get all our income from the restaurants is how we kind of run our farm. So inside our tunnels, so you can see how they're set up. Here's one of them that was baby greens. for this fall. This was taken this fall. It was this fall and winter. So it's 5 different baby mixes that don't, or 5 different baby leaves that go into our mix. All of our tunnels have the beds running this direction now. They're 4 feet wide. The 30 by 96, all the beds are 4 feet wide by about 88 feet long. And then our aisleways are 1.5 feet, and then we have 2 feet on the edges. Down at the far end, we'll probably get a question about that. That's just some row cover that's pushed back off of them because it was a sunny day. So that's the way we do our kind of internal cover. And there's another picture of it later on, so you can kind of see it closed. All right, so this is kind of where we're headed for the end of the day and the end of the session. We want to be able to think about our crops, and we're going to come back to this. We're going to talk about all the parts that go into this. I just wanted us to kind of have it all in front of us or in our heads where we're going to be. Because between here and there, there's a lot of numbers and a lot of tables and a lot of those kinds of things. But what we're ultimately trying to do is figure out what our revenue is, so what we're bringing in, what our costs are, and then we separate out our selling costs. We're going to talk about depreciation, net income, and then the other going down, we'll talk about profit per square foot, profit per square foot per day. When you look at that there, it's like $0.009. Why are you even keeping track of that? But we'll look at it down the road and talk about why it's really important and what kind of impact that has on it, depending on both the crop and the time of the year. Talk about return to labor there and what that means. And then our yield and sales efficiency and what we can kind of garner from those 2 things. So just keep in mind as we're trudging through all these numbers and tables that there is an ultimate end goal, and it's to figure out how much we're making in these tunnels. So outline, we're going to kind of hit here why it matters. Why do any of this stuff? Record keeping and a word about that. Some economic concepts, so we're kind of all on the same page. Revenue, cost, and profit, kind of the nitty-gritty, determining our pricing. And then our return to labor and employee wages. So a lot of times we say, can we hire more people? If we can, how much can we pay them? How much can we pay them but know that we're making money? Can we pay them a little more if they're doing a great job? Can we pay them less if they're not doing a very good job? Or those kinds of things with employee management. We're going to talk about kind of beyond dollars per area, or we hear dollars per acre or dollars per square foot a lot. That comes back to that day part. We're going to talk then about some income projections, and we'll wrap up with some questions. So hopefully that sounds like it's doable. I think it is, and we'll go from there. So why this matters? I think it matters because without it, we don't know what our overall profitability is. If we just think about the tunnel as kind of its own piece, or tunnels, depending on how many you have, we think about individual crop profitability. So the big part of that is that we might be selling out of a crop all the time, and we're coming home with money from the market, or we're getting checks in the mail from other vendor or other restaurants or that. But if we don't know what it cost us to make that, $10,000 or $1,000 or $100 or $10, any of that, if we don't know what it cost us to make it, well, we don't have a really good option there, and we don't have a really good way of comparing the crops to each other. So, we want to say, should I grow less carrots? Should I grow more carrots? Should I grow more salad mix? Should I grow head lettuce instead of salad mix? Should I grow both of them? What percentage? So just trying to, individual crop profitability comes, lets us make those kinds of decisions. Talk about production volumes and efficiency, and kind of, what does it mean to be selling 100% of what we're growing. Marketing decisions. We'll talk about pricing and income projections. Why does that matter? Because we need to have those things if we're going to think about what our budgets are going to be for next year. We need to know our return to labor, and again, that's the one to hire. So here's a quick word about record keeping. I'm just going to put it out there that everyone keeps different kinds of records. Some people don't keep any, and that's fine if it works for them. Some people keep a lot of them, and that's fine if it works for them. But any of the record keeping that you are doing, you've got to do something with it. If not, it's just another activity on the farm in a business that's always busy and always has something to do. And if you live on your farm, like I'm sure a lot of you do, like we do, there's always work right outside the door. So you have to want to keep records, and you have to want to do something with the records that you keep. You can keep them and keep great records, but if they just sit in the shoebox in the drawer, or if they just sit in an Excel file, or if they sit in QuickBooks, or they sit anywhere, they're not doing anything for you. So the reason we keep them is so that we can really they really impact the decisions that we make on our farm on a day to day and month to month and year to year basis. And I think that, one last thing is that there's going to be a lot of data presented here, a lot of records presented here, a lot of numbers that you don't have to keep all these for every crop. So a lot of the farmers that we're working with now that through some of our loan programs are required to report, we start with just 2 crops. So we ask them if they want to keep track of all of them, that's great. But if they want to do 2 of them, that's great too, and build up and add more each year and go from there. So. All right, just so we're on the same page here, some economic concepts we're going to talk about are gross sales or revenue, total, that's the total money coming in. Our net is our profit, so what we're making. Our costs, we've got broken out into both materials and labor. So we have both direct and indirect costs. So our direct costs would be things that we can really attribute right to the crop itself. So it might be, say, we're growing a bed of arugula, which is our example crop today. We're growing a crop of arugula, we put down this amount of compost in that bed and it costs this much money. We can really put that on there. We know that direct cost went right to that crop. And then there's other kind of indirect costs that we have, like insurance or rent or those kinds of things that we could break out if we wanted to and do a per square foot what we pay, but we don't do it that in depth. There's definitely people that do, and I think that's great. We just kind of lump that into indirect costs. And then we break our selling costs out separately from those, which would be things like going to market, driving to the restaurants, both in terms of time and in terms of mileage and wear and tear on vehicles. So reimbursement rates, or if you drive your own vehicle and your farm rents it from you, which is how we have it set up, that you have reimbursement rates that we're paying back to ourselves. And then also, if you have, like at farmers market, if you have a stall fee or any of those types of things as well. So the sales efficiency we said a little bit about. What we're saying is it's basically the percentage that we sold divided by the percentage that we harvested. So if we sell everything we grow, we've got 100%. If we sell 9 out of 10 things, we're at 90%. So we're just keep going that way. And obviously in most cases the higher the better. The higher though, we could start to see, if we're selling at 100, we could start to see, well, we need to be growing more of this crop because we're selling out of it all the time. And then wages, we do both paid and unpaid. And that's similar to a lot of the farms that we work with. They hire people in, which is what we do sometimes parts of the year, and then we don't actually pay ourselves an hourly wage. The way we're set up as an LLC is that we have disbursements, and so we make the decisions of when are we going to do it, but we do keep when are we going to disperse funds to ourselves, but we also do keep track of all of our hours so that we know what we have, and that we do put a rate on them at $10 an hour, just as kind of across the board. And then wages also, we have direct and overhead, and we have selling. We can break our wages out into what we're doing as well. All right, so let's start where we start, with an empty house, right? And hopefully a well-prepped one. So when we start talking about cost of production, we kind of break things out into pre-planting. So we have bed prep, which includes our soil prep, and fertility and amendments. So when we had one tunnel, we used to broad fork things, broad fork the beds. As we've kind of gotten larger, we've now moved to, we take the Troy build in there and just do a walk behind tiller. We just don't have the broad forking, and everything just takes way too long with a lot of tunnels, and so we don't have the time to sit there all day and do it. So it does work well on a smaller scale. I think as you get bigger, not that we're big by any means, but as you get bigger, just looking at those things to be a little more efficient. And we work with some farms as well, and I'm sure there's some of you on here that have doors on their tunnels that they can back a small tractor in and till away with a 3 or a 4 or a 5 foot tiller in the tunnels as well, which works also. So we've got soil prep, and then we have our fertility and amendments. So whether that's compost, whether that's in our case some blood meal and bone meal and potassium sulfate in some cases, and it may be that water soluble fertilizers, it may be injectors, it may be all these things that go into it, but keeping track of those. And then irrigation. So we run drip in ours. A lot of people run drip. A lot of people run overhead. A lot of people do hand watering. We run drip in ours, and we'll look at the cost of that. And then our labor, obviously, in there to spread those amendments and those types of things. And then if there's any specific tools that we use only in the tunnel. So we used to have those on the farm, like with the broad fork and the claw and those things. We've moved away from that. We really don't have any specific tools that we have only for the tunnel. We kind of just have tools that get used on the farm in general. And since we've kind of expanded here with these additional tunnels, we haven't bought any additional tools in the past few years, and so we aren't putting any cost of any tools into this because the tools that we do have already been paid for and depreciated over the last 5 years when our farm was getting up and going. And then we have depreciation, which we'll talk about, but it's the structure and the poly and our internal covering. And we'll look at how we do depreciation, both for taxes and for kind of the economic piece. All right, so here's kind of our breakout of our cost of production for the bed prep. So we've got our tiller, and this is for kind of one bed. We run over it 2 times with the tiller. So we've got 20 minutes there. Again, labor is assumed at $10 an hour. It's kind of I think a fair price, an average price for farm labor, and so we just kind of keep that in there to account for costs. We did some blood meal. You can see it there. Potassium sulfate as well, and then we have mileage. The potassium sulfate was delivered to our house, but we went and picked up the blood meal and we reimbursed it the IRS rate. So this was last year's. It was 0.555. It's now up to 0.565. So for this year, that'll be our mileage rate reimbursement. So that's our mileage to go get it, wear and tear on the vehicles. Compost that we put down in there, and the cost per yard, and then the amount that we used, and then also our labor to spread those amendments in the compost and incorporate them. So you can see just to do our bed prep in that, we're talking about $28.31. So what you'll see on these are kind of exact numbers as we kind of added things up. But when we get to kind of the summary, we just rounded to the nearest dollar rather than deal with all the little decimal points there. All right, so irrigation. We do run drip and everything. We've got some hoses to get it from. In one of our tunnels, we have a frost-free hydrant, but in the other ones, we don't. So we have some hoses to run over to the other tunnels. So we've got those, a number of houses, and then within each house, why it's at $4 and not $20 is because we have 5 beds within each of those. So we're basically distributing that cost to each of those beds. The barbs to hook the drip up to, they're $2 a piece. We run 4 runs on those 4-foot beds. We don't always run all those runs at the same time. Like if we have tomatoes in the tunnel, we run 2 of those runs. We just have the on-off valves or the on-off barbs, so we can turn 2 of them off, but they still are in place. And then for things like salad mix or head lettuce or spinach or any of the collards, kale, any of those kinds of crops, we run all 4 of them. So you can see total cost for our irrigation. We're talking about just around $20. And the nice thing about this is what we're doing is each of our beds, no matter what we're planting in them, kind of has these costs, right? We have the same irrigation setup in all our beds. We do pretty much the same bed prep and fertility applications in all of our beds. And so what we end up having is we don't have to calculate this out for every time. So what we can basically say is, okay, here's this crop. Before we even put it in the ground, we know that this is our irrigation, this is our bed prep, and those calculations are already done for whatever crop we're doing. So we never, unless we switch something up and do more or less fertility treatments or do more or less irrigation or switch to overhead irrigation or something like that, we don't ever have to do these calculations again. So here's our internal cover. The next one was just a picture of it to show what it looks like. We do one big cover with some high tensile wire run underneath, 4 runs of it end to end, and then we can push it back like you saw in that picture earlier. That top piece is just one piece, and we can push it all the way back when we want to get in there. So here's our internal cover. So it's kind of the cost per one tunnel. So we use the Ag 19. It's the second lightest weight one that they have. Remay is fine. Any of those. That's just the one that we've chosen to use. Wire strainers, which are just the tighteners for the high tensile wire. So we have 4 of those per house, and then we have high tensile wire there. We just use the fencing wire from the feed store, and then our labor to set up that cover. About 15 or about an hour and a half. So at $10, it's $15. So our total is 109. We can get a square footage amount. We can also get a bed amount. So if we just divide that 109 by 5 beds, then we get that 2880 is where that came from. So we're just spreading that out across the 5 beds or the production area. All right. So we're gonna pick arugula for the crop. It's the numbers that I was working on yesterday and this morning, and so it seemed to fit well. It seemed to be timely, and so we're just going to use that as our example. But we do this for all of our crops. So we've got our bed prep. This is for one bed, so a 4x88 bed, which is 352 square feet. So we have our bed prep there, our irrigation, our internal cover. So we know. Basically, for our arugula or for anything that we put in there, we've got this $69.51 is basically our cost before we put anything in the ground, before we add in depreciation or anything like that. All right, so depreciation. So here comes the fun stuff, right? So we have to account somehow for the cost of the structure and those kinds of things, and so we could just account for it all up front and run in the red, or what we can do is pick some certain times based on a number of different things that we want to depreciate the structure out over a certain period of years. So the tunnels that we bought that we're using for this example were used tunnels. We went and took them down, moved them, and rebuilt them. So I would clearly say that we have 3 30x96s, and then we have 1 30x48 that we use for wash pack. That's not for production. It's covered with shade, with 70% shade plastic. And so, but for all of those things, because we got them used and because we tore them down and moved them, and we could hire some labor to do it, our price here is, I understand, is really low. So the total cost for all those houses, for frames and end walls, ground post, additional materials that we had to buy and get sent. Buy in new. We bought new ground posts because the houses were cemented in. It was a greenhouse production, or a heated greenhouse production facility, so they had them all cemented in. So we just left them because I didn't really feel like pulling 172 posts and knocking all the cement off of them. And then labor for 3 guys that I hired to help build these. So what we're looking at is about $14,000. And say, to buy a new 30x96 that's similar to what we have would be somewhere around 12. So, the depreciation on these is pretty low because they're used and because we were able to get them used and move them. So, so what we do is we took out a loan to do this. We took out a $15,000 loan, and the length of our loan is 4 years. So there's a couple different ways to think about depreciation. One is kind of the length of the house, in general, or length of materials. So we could say the steel frame of it is going to it's going to last 20, and galvanized steel is going to last 20 years minimum. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 40 years, but we could say 20 years and depreciate that out, and then we would separate out the poly from it as well, because the poly is warranted for 4 years. And so every we depreciate the cost of the poly over 4 years, and then we would have a new poly and then depreciate that over 4 years, and new poly, depreciate that, and we could kind of make some assumptions that the price is going to go up kind of every 4 years when we buy that. And so that would be a way to do it if you were doing it, a 20-year life of the structure, 4-year life of the poly. So what we've done is, because our length of our loan is 4 years, we put in all of the depreciation into 4 years. So that worked out really well for both the poly and the plastic. So for the economics, that makes sense. For taxes, it could be something different as well, besides the length of the house or the economic piece like we were doing. It could be that, early on when we started, we built our first tunnel and it was $15,000 and we depreciated it over 2 years as far as our taxes go. So we were a new farm, startup, lots of costs, and to be able to have that $7,500 to go against our taxes for the first 2 years was really helpful. So, and our accountant helped us with that. So if we come back to kind of where we were at about this $14,000, and we're going to do it for 4 years, we're going to, basically this $3,496 or $3,500 works out to, what we need to pay for, what we need to account for, or how much we're depreciating each year. So that's for the total square footage. We could think of it in that way, but what we like to think about is the production space only. So, what we have in production for each house is about 1,760 feet for those three 30 by 96s. So it's 5 beds at 352 square feet for each bed. So to be able to depreciate this over the production space only allows us to assign that value to the crops growing in that space. Right? We don't have any crops growing in our aisleways, and so to assign a value there, to assign a depreciation value there, doesn't account for it in the value of the crops. So we stick it all in the production area, and then we can assign all that value to the crop, so we know how much that crop is or isn't making. So if we think about that, it's 66 cents per square foot per year if we use that, 5,280 square feet. Or if we think about a number of days, which we'll come back to again, there's another one of those weird little numbers of 0.002, dollars per foot squared per day. And that doesn't seem like very much. But if we look at down at the bottom here, we have that times this 528, we'll look at in a minute. That's the actual production space that we had in arugula. So we had a bed and a half of it. And that was in there for 102 days. So that's how we start to assign crop value or depreciation values to the crops or depreciation costs. It's almost like we're charging them. Another way to think about it would be that we're charging them rent for the space that they're occupying, and that's their rental rate. So again, $0.002 doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, but when it's 102 days, and people might be saying, why do you have arugula in there for 102 days? So it's in there for us because it was our fall planting, so it went in September 21st. And then it was harvested. The last harvest was January 2nd. So we accounted for all those days that we need to charge it rent, even if it's just sitting there. So it ends up working out to that $0.002 ends up working out to $107 of depreciation that we need to assign to that crop. So here's kind of we'll talk a little. We'll look at depreciation in the final screen or the final table too, and we'll come back to that. So. Again, so here our arugula, this is what we actually had planting. So we had 8 rows at 132 feet. So it's 1.5 beds or 528 square feet. We make some assumptions about what the seeder puts down, how many seeds per feet, how many seeds per row. And then, so what we ended up putting down was approximately, 100,000 seeds. So what we're trying to get here is our seed cost, right? So we have a approximate number per ounce. We bought a half-pound bag to do this, so we end up, that's $20. We end up at $17.12 in seed. Takes about 10 minutes for us to seed that space, that bed and a half. So if we remember that $10 an hour and assign 10 minutes to it, then that's where we get this fine, $18.79. So that's our kind of planting costs and our seed and our labor to do it or to put it in the ground. So if we come back here, we can kind of think of this, all right, here's these numbers again, our bed prep and fertility, our irrigation, our internal cover, our total cost per bed, and then what our seeds for 1.5 bed, and then our total costs for this 1.5 bed, that 123, just came from that $69.51 and multiplying it by 1.5. So if we remember that $69.51 was for 1 bed, and we had 1.5 beds planted. So that's how we got the 123. So depreciation then, we just calculated it also for that space, was $107. So our total cost through planting with depreciation is $230.77. So that's before we harvest anything, before we weed anything, before we wash and pack anything, any of that. That's just the cost just to get us through planting in the tunnels built and planting in the ground. Right. So here's our yield and sales from this year from that crop. So from 528 square feet, we had 105.5 pounds. We had 0.2 pounds per, sorry, 0.2 pounds per square foot. So that's a pretty low yield. What we usually expect from spring and early spring, like February planted arugula, and then also like March and April planted arugula, is about 0.5 pounds per square foot. So the reason it was pretty late was low is that we went in pretty late. We had a later planting date than we usually do. We usually get 3 harvests from cut and come again arugula or cut and come salad mix, and we got about 1.5. So and that's fine. That's when it worked for us to get the tunnels taken down and built and site prepped and then seeded. So you can see how the split out was. I said most of our stuff goes through restaurants. So you can see 94 of those 105.5 pounds went to a restaurant. We charged $7.50 for the restaurant price a pound. So from there we generated revenue of $705 in that column on the right. And then, we had 11.5 pounds that ran through the farmer's market that we go to. We charged $10 a pound at the farmer's market, and so we ended up at $115 for revenue from that farmer's market sales. So there's got to be additional costs, right? So above and beyond those things, like we were just talking about, there's the weeding, harvesting, all those things. We talked about some selling costs early on. So what do those look like for us? So additional costs here: weeding, harvesting, packing, direct labor. So the weeding here looks really low, right? It's half an hour for all that space for a bed and a half, and that's just kind of one of the beautiful things about winter harvesting and fall and winter growing is that by the time you get things in, we usually only have 1 or 2 weedings, and then we're done weeding for the year. So we usually do one in about the middle of October, and then depending on how much is coming in, how strong the weed pressure is, and then we usually do one more at the end or the beginning of November, and that's kind of it. Light's low enough. We're not really irrigating very much at all, and so they have low light, low temperatures, and not much moisture for weed seed to germinate or for any of the rhizomes from the grass weeds to start growing. So our weeding labor is really low. For winter stuff. Harvesting, it took us 2.5 hours, or a little more than 2.5 hours to harvest those. And then packing, it took us a little more than an hour to pack those. So, and we just keep track of it while we're doing it. We've got we've got it on our phone, that goes back to a Google Drive, that I haven't got set up all the way, that Laura developed, where it can just enter into a spreadsheet. We also have our notebook that goes with us that, we just write down the time we start harvesting and the time we end harvesting, and then we can go back and do the same thing with packing, time we start packing, time we end packing for the crop. And then when we do our records at the end of the year, we can just, or the end of the month, or when that crop comes out, we can just go ahead and go through our notebook or through our web or spreadsheet and add those up. So for weeding, harvesting, and packing, we're talking about $45. So Marcia's asking, do we have containers that we pack into? So we package everything into, for the market, we package them into just bags. So for the market, they're the small, 8 by 10, I think, and then for the, and we do them in in 0.33 pound bags, so third of a pound bags. And then for the restaurants, we package into their 10 by 18 inch bags, and we can put about 4 pounds in there. So the packing on here is the cost of our labor. In our selling costs, you'll see we accounted for those bags. So that's all that we pack into. And then if we were to, so another question is, well, what do we harvest into? So do we harvest into, we harvest into tubs basically. So we didn't buy any new for this. Those have already been paid for. If we were to buy new ones, which we're going to have to this year, those will go back into our cost as well. But they'll probably generally go into farm overhead since they get used across the farm. So they won't really be assigned to a specific crop. I hope that answers your question, Marcia. If not, just shout on there. So additional costs for mileage and delivery and market labor. So this top table here is just one example. So we have this for every time we deliver to restaurants, or every time we deliver to, or every time we go to market. So the way we're looking at this here, so we can say, don't worry about the bottom two tables right now. So what we have here is the date that we did it, mileage 61 miles. I know for that one we delivered to all three. We delivered to 3 restaurants. 1 restaurant picks up at the market. So I know when it's 61 miles, it's 3 restaurants. That mileage rate is the 0.555 per mile. It also takes me about 2 hours to deliver those because we sit and talk and do that also. And so if we say that at $10 an hour, that's $20. So if we skip the number of items for a minute, we go to the total. That's just the mileage total cost plus the hours cost. So then the number of item comes in that's the number of items that we took on that trip. And so what we don't want to do is assign all the costs to each of those items. So each of those items are getting a cost of delivery. And so if we have 6 items, we take that total amount and divide it by 6, and that tells us that it was $8.98 for each item. So that's kind of how we allocate those costs back per item. So it's kind of a dirty way to do it, a cleaner way, but this gets us to where we want to be with our numbers. A cleaner way would be to know how many square feet came out of each of those 6 items, and then allocate it back on a square foot basis or a poundage basis. So if you had 40 pounds of one thing and 10 pounds of another, the 40 pounds may get more of the cost. But we've just said we're okay to just assign it kind of in this way and get those costs. So that was just one example. So if we add up our trips from the farmers to the market and to restaurants, divide those out, cost per item, that's where we get from. So these numbers are coming from August 31st to January 2nd. So we get a total mileage and labor for the farmers market, and that accounts for our market's a 4-hour market. It accounts for our labor time there, as well as our stall fees and the mileage. And then the restaurants account for our, and it gets divided by the number of items as well. So it cost us about $36.13 to take arugula, only arugula, to the farmer's market, and it costs us about $100 and just a little more than $100 to take just the arugula part to the restaurants. And then you can see down at the bottom as well, we have the bags. So the 24 bags at the 9-cent bags are the bigger bigger 10 by 14, and then the smaller ones are I think they're 8 by 10s. They run 3 cents a piece. So for the restaurants, again, we pack into 4-pound bags, and so that's a lot faster packing for them, and it's actually a lower cost per pound than the 3-cent bags, where it takes us a little more than 3 of them to get to a pound. So our total selling costs are this total up top from the mileage and delivery labor and the bags as well. So again, that $141.30 is only for the arugula. It's not for any of the other crops that we took to the market. Right, so again, here's our table. This is what we were trying to get to, right? So we know that we had $820. Let's forget the 4-year depreciation one just for a minute. So the right column, just forget that one. So if we said no depreciation, so this is how we do field stuff for the most part, right? We aren't covering it with anything, so we aren't having these depreciation costs that go along with it. So if this arugula was field grown, same labor, same revenue, all those kinds of things, we would have what we have on the column on the center column here. So again, our costs, our selling costs, we had just figured out, and again, we rounded these mostly, so there wasn't a lot of decimal places to look at. No depreciation for the no depreciation one. So our net income was our revenue minus both our selling our costs. We separated out the selling costs, but it's minus our costs. So we get that net income. We can figure out what our profit per square foot was. So again, that's fairly low because we only got a harvest and 1.5 cuts basically off of this arugula because it was planted later. And then we can also look at this profit per square foot per day. And again, that's a low number. There's that 102 days. But we know that we generated $511 off of that, $0.009. And so that's somewhat useful here. What it's more useful with is when we have a bunch of other crops in our table that we're looking at, and we might see that head lettuce had, 0.007 profit and salad mix had 0.009 profit. So, we can start to make some decisions on similar items. Do we grow them both? Do we grow separate ones? Do we grow just one of them? And so that's really what we use that dollars per square foot per day is a way to compare crops to each other. Without that amount or without that day, we really don't know. We may generate $500, and if it takes us 100 days to do it, and we may generate $600 in another crop, but if it takes us 200 days to do it, if we just look at that profit per square foot, then the one that took longer but generated more money is going to appear like it made more, but in reality it didn't. It wasn't as efficient, so that's why we have this day. Then we have our return to labor here, so that takes our total labor that we've accounted for and divides it by our net income. So what that's telling us, return to labor is one way to talk about it. It's also kind of what we make per hour or what the farm makes per hour. So if I look at that $51, what it tells me is I can hire someone at $10 an hour to do this work, and the farm will still be making $41 an hour. Or I could hire someone at $20, and the farm would be making $31 an hour with these numbers here. And again, it's nice in the winter because our weeding costs are low, our irrigation costs are low. We don't have a lot of labor that goes in. It's basically just harvesting and marketing. So again, it's 0.2 pounds, and we sold everything that we harvested. So if we look over to the 4-year depreciation one, next to it, again, same revenue, same cost, same selling costs. We just add in that $108, which was 107 and change, just rounded. We add that in. You can see what it does to our net income, what it does to our profit, what it does to our profit per square days, drops it a little, and it drops our return to labor also, but we're paying for that house. So if we didn't include that depreciation, we would really just not be accounting for any of the money that we paid for the house for. So that's per hour, Rob. Rob asked the question, is that $51.10 for 10 hours or per hour? So it's per hour. So, and again, it's something that we can look at for really, for here it's really good efficiency because we have, because we're basically just harvesting in the winter stuff. So in, sales efficiency, we see 100%, which means we sold everything. So if you had, say you depreciated your house over 20 years, you could just add another column in here to the right, and you would just take that depreciation instead of being, $108, it would be whatever that amount worked out over 20 years would be. So it obviously would be less. So, or if your houses cost more, if we would have bought them new, we did that calculation earlier today, Laura and I, if we would have bought them new and had, instead of $15,000 or $14,000 into them, had $35,000 into them, our depreciation would be somewhere around $260, I think it was $267, $270 for the 4-year one. So we just have to keep track of that and add that in, or else we aren't accounting for any of those costs. All right. So now what? So now we have this really nice table. What can we do with it? So besides that return to labor or what we can hire people for, we also have this yield per square foot. And if we keep track of that, we can start to see like, okay, 0.2. Like we've kept track long enough and worked with the other farmers long enough to know that should be more likely 0.5, 0.6, and somewhere in there. And so, that allowed us to say, okay, we're low, and why were we low? We could go back and say we were low because we planted late, so we know next year we need to plant earlier. We knew we needed to plant earlier, but we didn't have any tunnels built or the soil prepped at that time, so that was as soon as we could do it. So if we keep track from our yields year to year, we can start to see those things like, are we low? Are our yields increasing? Are we steady? And the other thing that's really nice is we can start to make projections for the following year for things that we're going to plant if we have a good idea of what our yields are. And then the sales efficiency is 100%. We sold everything that we grew. So what that says is that's great. We sold everything we grew. What it also says is I know we would sell more if we had more because we had people asking for it. So what we need to do is either get more tunnels going so we can plant more arugula, or we need to grow less of something else. And being able to look at the numbers that from other crops that that are similar to this, we can start to say, okay, should we not grow one that was maybe making 50 cents per square foot, that then should we not grow that one, and should we put that more into arugula? So it's always a balance of saying, how much do we need to have more of this, but because of our market, and we're not just strictly wholesale and not just one or two crops, we need to make that balance between growing some crops that are less profitable, not that are not profitable at all, but some that are less profitable, so that we have a mix of crops available. So here's a better example, kind of what we were talking about, or a visual example of why doesn't dollars per area work, or why do we need to go beyond that, and why does the days make sense? All right, so here's our fall 2012 4-year depreciation, and then so that's what we just looked at, and here's our spring 2013 estimates. So what we're thinking is our yields. So our revenue is much higher because our yields are 0.5 pounds per square foot, so we've upped our yields to more what we have, because we know as things get warmer, in the spring we do get those 3 harvests from them where we didn't this fall. That 90% is, we're just saying, okay, what if we lost 10% of the crop? What if we had, right now we don't have any flea beetles. In the spring we have really bad flea beetle pressure at our place, like I'm sure most of you do. And then maybe we get some disease in there. So we took 90% as a 10% loss basically. The costs are kind of estimated here. We added 3 hours for weeding because we know the weeds are going to grow much faster in the spring when they're getting water and sunlight and temperature. And then we added 8 more hours for harvesting and packing. Again, those are just estimates, but I think they're pretty conservative and reasonable estimates. Obviously our hours of harvesting and packing are going to go up if our yields go up. So our selling costs, that just adds in some bags as well. Same amount of trips. We still are taking 2 trips a week to the restaurants. We're still taking 1 trip a week to the market. But we're going to have more cost in bags, but not that much more cost. So here's the real key for these days and why it matters. Right? So if we look at the depreciation line, what we see is they were in there for 102 days in the fall. So we had to allocate $108 to them. In the spring, what we usually see is, the first harvest is 21 days out, second harvest is 14 days from that, and the third harvest is 14 days from that. So what we're doing is getting this much higher yield, much faster growth in a much shorter time. So because it's only in there 49 days, we can take that $0.002 per square foot per day and allocate that at 49 cents a day. So that's where we get that $52. So we have a much lower depreciation cost that's going to these crops the faster we turn them over. So a lot of times, some of the farmers we're working with where this also comes up is they may only use their houses for tomatoes. So they may only use their house 7 to 8 months of the year, but they're paying for it for the entire year. So what they have to do is add all that depreciation cost into their tomatoes. So where if they did another fall or winter crop, or even a spring crop before, or a fall one after, that they'd be able to allocate those depreciation costs to some other crops. So that's another way to think about, why would you add additional crops in, is you get to put this depreciation spread across more crops or more days. So our net income, you can see, is hopefully much higher than what it was in the winter with the higher yields, even though we have much higher costs. See our profit per square foot, our profit per square foot per day, and then our return to labor. We added in those hours, so we have 21 hours. So if we get this yield in this revenue, these costs are similar to what happens. We get that in 49 days. We sell it, and then what we end up with is, instead of that $50 or $51, we're talking about $68. So per hour that's returned to the farm. So those are I'm really happy with those numbers. I'm really happy with the numbers that we have right now, and I'm hoping that we hit these numbers for the spring one. And again, so that lets me say, like, okay, if I do all the labor myself, then, or someone, or my wife, or that, then we can generate that much coming back into the farm, which eventually comes back into us, is the owners. Or what I can say is I can hire someone for $10 an hour, or I can hire 2 people for $10 an hour each, pay $20 an hour in labor, and then the farm still is getting, close to $48.86. So you can see our yield is up, and then our sales efficiency, again, if we're trying to sell 90% of it. Right, so Dennis is asking, what about the remaining 214 days? That's a really good question. So what happens is, so this will get pulled out after 49 days. So let's just say, for argument's sake, it's April 15th, which is the planting, when we plant tomatoes. So we pull those out. Tomatoes go in that same day, and so, or the next day, and so then that day count starts over for the tomatoes. So if the tomatoes are in there for, let me grab a calculator real quick. If the tomatoes are in there for, let's say, 180 days, so they're 0.002 times 180 times, so that's 0.36, and then we need to have the square footage that they're in. So let's say it's 352 square feet. So it'd be $126. So we would just allocate those that depreciation to the crop that's in there in that space. So, and then tomatoes pull out. Some say spinach goes in the fall. Tomatoes we'd have whatever, 365 minus 214 minus 49. So we have 102 days left. And so if the spinach was in there for 102 days, then that would get that 102 days of depreciation cost would get allocated to the spinach then. Does that make sense, Dennis? Great. All right, so here's the fun part. We figure out, if we have these things, how much we can charge and what we'll make from it. Right, so here we have, up top we have just a couple lines taken out, so it's the revenues from both of those, the net income, and the poundage. So if we come down to the bottom table, it's only the actual yields and prices and income from this fall and winter and so it's ignoring the 2013. But what it's saying is, like, okay, if we charge $4 per crop or per pound, and we get $4.22 in revenue, then we're going to make $5 on that crop. That was a whole lot of work, in my mind, for $5. So, right, we can do it $6, then we'd make $216 at $8, we'd make $427 at $10, we can make $623. So we can play, once we have these kind of costs established and known, then we can play around with, what they're going to be. So our costs are probably going to be next year in the fall when we grow arugula. Our costs are probably going to be pretty similar to what they are now. So we can have that in there, and we can then start playing with our prices and saying, like, what do we want to charge and what do we want to make? What do we, it's a way to think about if you're saving for something on the farm and you need X amount of dollars, that you can start charging a certain amount to generate that money, whether it's to buy a tractor, whether it's to buy another hoop house, whether it's to do anything like that. So you can just play around with the pricing, and the idea is figuring out what your break even is, right? So our break even is just under $4 per pound. So we clearly don't want to sell things for $4 per pound. And I don't think we really want to sell things with our costs for $6 per pound either. I'm really happy with our $7.50 price for restaurants. They're happy with it, we're happy with it, which makes everyone happy. And then for the market, our $10 a pound, I'm happy with that, and people are willing to pay it and happy with it also. So, right. So here's what we were just talking a little bit about, that return to labor. So if we look at it, again, we can say, this is when we do, this is unpaid labor, because I did all the labor for this year for the fall for these crops. But what we can start to say is, okay, that money's coming back into the farm. It's eventually going to be dispersed to us, or it's going to be spent back in the farm. But it's also really, what I love about it is to be able to say, I can hire someone for this amount, and if they can do things, relatively close to what we do, then we're going to be generating. If we pay them 10, we're going to generate $41, or if we pay them with the depreciation one, if we pay them 10, we're going to still be generating $30 per hour. So. All right, so it's just about 9 o'clock. That's what we're mostly shooting for, being done by then. So I'm going to say thank you. This is more what it looks like here usually. This was taken a few days ago, but now it's all melted and icy. Well, it's going to be icy tomorrow night. It's all melted and sloppy. So thanks again, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I think, again, it's really important to say that, we didn't start out recording all this data for all this record keeping for all of our crops. We started out with a few of them and added on, and next year we'll probably record that spring arugula, but we may not record everything like this for every crop every year. I think once you get down the road, you can really kind of figure out, where you're at and what's useful to keep track of. So get some ideas about what your crops are generating. All right, so why don't we answer a couple of pros and cons on Gothic and Round. We use Gothic pretty much exclusively, mostly for snow load. They're a little more expensive, but they're, definitely hold snow more than the Quonset style does. I don't think that there's anything wrong with Quonsets. I know people that use them. You just have to be aware of it. And I like the space. The Gothic's kind of up higher. In the Gothic tunnels, in the Gothic ones, it's a nicer work environment, and it also gets heat up and away from the crops. So, and then when you go 30 wide, that's pretty much your option, 30 or 34 wide. So I like the wider tunnels also. So most profitable, least profitable crops. I think clearly, we're running some numbers on tomatoes right now, and there's a reason that they're the #1 crop grown in them, and why some people only grow them. Tomatoes is a moneymaker. It just is. So, it is what it is. Tomatoes are definitely profitable. What was surprisingly profitable that I didn't think really would be, I thought it would make some money, but leafy greens, if you've got a market for them, like chard or kale or collards, our farmers market isn't really a market for them, but the restaurants are. And so those leafy greens that do really well through the winter and you can harvest off of those multiple times are a big money maker. Basil in the summer, if you can move it, is a big money maker. Peppers do okay. Cucumbers are definitely a bigger money maker than peppers. So those are some of the kind of cool and warm ones. So the cost share covers up to $21.78. I'd say, Jeff, if you have funds available for building larger than that I would build larger than that. I do a 30 by 72 rather than a 20 by 96 because of the width of it. Gets less cold creeping in from the sides, and so if you have the funds to be able to go above and beyond that and pay so say you get a 30 by 96 or a 30 by 144 or something like that, that I think that, if you have the funds to be able to pay that extra square footage that they don't cost share on, I'd say go for it. Yeah, Carrie, return to labor is talked about in accounting and finance books. I can't tell you off the top of my head what they are, or what accounting books they are, but there's definitely a return to labor out there, and sometimes they call it labor efficiency as well. Might be something to look it up under. All right, so perennial crops. We have done some. We're working on a project here at MSU, and then we also work with some farmers also that are doing some cherries, some sweet cherries, and some raspberries in them. I think that it makes more sense when you do perennial crops to either have a movable tunnel that you can move it off of, or, there's a question right on time, movable tunnels that you can move it off of, or a 3-season tunnel like a hay grove or a tunnel tech or those style, where, for us at least, those perennial crops need that dormancy period in the winter. And so to pull the cover off of them gets them their dormancy period, and then to pull it back on in the spring. So my experience has been with them in these kinds of 4-season tunnels. It's definitely more cost per square foot to build, and you aren't using that space in the winter. Or if it's closed down, what happens is those, especially the cherries, will push bud, and then they get frosted off, and you get nice growth, but never any harvest off of it. You have experience with the Johnny's low tunnel or caterpillars? Yep. So we do some of the low tunnels at home. I think it's good for some crops for overwintering. I think, we do spinach in the tunnels, but they do really well in the field too with spinach. We've done the low tunnels over those where we just know we're not going to harvest it. We're going to pull it out. The tunnels, the down period is kind of that March where things have been pulled out and you're replanted but not ready to harvest yet. And overwintering spinach under the low tunnels works really well. I've built some caterpillar tunnels with them. I haven't had any personal experience using them. A friend down the road that farms has just put one up this fall, so I'm definitely interested in asking her. And I think, from my experience or from what I've heard from other people's experience, it works. So longer tunnel or 2 shorter ones. I like longer tunnels, or I like 1 tunnel as opposed to 2 tunnel in the same square footage, because if you're growing through the winter, because you hold more air volume, what ends up happening is they heat up a little slower, but they hold their heat longer in the through the night. So having 1 big one versus 2 small ones will run the 1 big one will run a little warmer. We do have a movable tunnel at home. I think that they work really well. I like it. I think that our farm is set up it's longer and skinnier, and so we don't have a lot of space where we can move it back and forth, so it's kind of just 2 moves back and forth. And then, so I think that they're really effective on farms where you can have even more moves than that. So recommended suppliers, so I could say, as an employee of Michigan State University, I cannot recommend or endorse any companies, products, or other blah, blah, blah stuff. So I think, Jeff, there's a lot of good suppliers out your way. I think if you go on hightunnels.org, that you can find a list of suppliers there. I can say us personally, on our farm we have Atlas houses and Rimmel houses. I've built Four Season Tools houses that I really like. I've built Zimmerman houses that I really like. I've built Ledgewood houses that I like. I've built Greyhawk houses that I like. Nifty Hoops is one in Michigan here. He's been building more. So I think that, there's definitely some good ones. And for movables, I think the Four Season Tools is in Iowa. Or they're in Kansas City, but one of their owners is in Iowa. And then, Rimmel has another one. Arnois has really nice houses out of Quebec. So there's some to start. And again, that's by no means the only ones out there. There's a lot out there, and a lot that are nice. So Laura says 0 several nights. It would have been quite cold to kill oats. Not sure the amount of row cover would have saved a crop. So yeah, I mean we've had -20 outside, and underneath the cover inside it's still run about 10 to 12 degrees. So it's it's what we've seen, and I think what other farmers that are much more experienced also have told us is that it's not at a certain point it's very cold and that kills things, but what's more kills them in the winter is the not getting thawed out. So if you can get a cold night, which for us is usually clear, right, you usually end up with a sunny day or at least partially sunny day the next day. So if it can thaw out, that's a really helpful thing to that's really helpful with those crops. Where you really get into trouble is when it's really cold and really dark for a number of days in a row. So we don't collect rainwater off of ours. I've seen some systems that do. Some people have done it just with gutters. I know actually for Practical Farmers of Iowa did a field day, and they have it up on their website. And there's also an Iowa State paper that went along with it that has the design. That has a rainwater collection system on it. And then I know, so that's kind of an addition went on. And then I know Four Season Tools has a hip board, like a modified hip board that has a gutter there, and they have a system for collecting rainwater off of it. I know Lewis Jett down in West Virginia has been doing it too, and he said he's meeting about half of his watering needs from the rainwater collection. So I think that's great. Single cover or double. So the ones that are in this picture here are all single. They're single because we don't have any electricity anywhere near where these ones are. And so the other ones that are closer to electricity are movable as a single. Our other one, our 30 by 96, is the first one we built. It's a double layer, inflated. We need to replace the plastic next year, and I'm thinking about going to single layer. So I think the double layer is good. I think it sheds slow. I think it runs a little warmer. But there's also costs that go along with it. So I feel like if we can get away with a single layer, then we might as well spend half the amount on plastic that we have to. So I'd rather spend $500 on plastic to cover one of these than $1,000. So, but I don't think that means you shouldn't have a double layer. And if you're doing any sort of heating at all, even very minimally, even heating to 32 or 35, then you should definitely have double layer. We don't ever run fans in the winter to remove the moisture, but we do vent them. So we have, you can't see them on here because we built them and I didn't cut them out yet in this picture, but on each of these ends has two louvers, and so we'll go ahead and open those up and get that out. That I think managing the moisture and the humidity in the tunnels is, if at least important, if not more important than managing the temperature. So we don't want to have right, yeah, there is the foam tubes between. Thanks, Dennis. So, you know, what we don't want to have is 50 degrees or 45 degrees in there and 100% humidity. I mean, we've seen it get white mold really quickly, lots of disease problems, lots of disease pressure. So by having those vents that we can open and close, that's how we manage our humidity. And we're not looking for a lot of growth. We aren't getting a lot of growth in the tunnel. In the winter, we're getting some, but not a lot. So I'm less concerned about the temperature. So we'll vent, you know, when it's about 45 or 50 in the tunnel. So any sunny day, we're venting. Try to get that moisture out. We don't use any shade cloth to dry or cure crops. At the student farm last year at MSU, we put covered one with shade cloth and did cool season crops all summer in it. So we did kale, chard, head lettuce, so spinach, those kinds of crops through the summer here, where it's really hot, and it even gets spinach for us in the summer is really hard to do here. So to be able to have it in the tunnel with the shade cloth, I think was a cool thing to see. But I do know people that do put covers over them and will cure, like we've cured onions in them without putting a cover over it when it's going to rain. I don't think you need the cover for onions. I've seen people do it with garlic cover. I've seen people do winter squash over the tunnel, over it and cover it with shade to cure them. So I think that's definitely something to do. But for us, we really don't have the space in there to do it. All of our tunnels are pretty much planted, 88 feet. So we've got, about 3 feet or about 4 feet on each end or so that isn't planted. Otherwise, it's planted and it's always planted. So when something comes out, something else gets planted right away. So the question about GAP or third-party certification for our farm, we don't have any third-party certification for our farm. For us, it's not. I have to think about how I say it. For our markets, we aren't being required to have it. So I know that some people in some of their markets, especially grocery stores and that, are requiring third-party certification. We sell direct to restaurants and direct to consumers, and so we're not required to have that. And as things, we'll see what develops here with the Food Safety and Modernization Act, but even then, we'll be exempt from that when it goes through for being, under $500,000 gross sales, and we sell everything within 275 miles. So for us, it's not a necessity. That doesn't mean that it's not a good thing. I think that if it works for if it's required and it gives you an advantage in your market, then that's something that you can have, or you should, that you should have. So do we have anything to sell right now? Yep. So we're wrapping up what we have to sell, mostly because we sold out, not because it wouldn't be growing, but we have kind of the last of salad mix. We have last of collards, last of kale, last of chard, pak choy. We just harvested the last of our escarole this morning. There's some lettuce mix in there that's still okay to cut. All the head lettuce has been harvested out. And then we've got potatoes that were in the cooler. So if you started over today, what would I do differently? That's a really good question. I think that so our first house we built, 34 by 96 double layer polycarbonate end walls, polycarbonate baseboards, and kind of went all out on it. I think I would do houses like you see in this picture instead. So instead of spending, and that was 5 years, 2007, so 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So the house was about $20,000 for it. I would have spent much less than I could probably have at that time. I probably could have built that house for that's a 30 by 96 or even a 34 by 96 without all the polycarbonate in that for 10 to 12, maybe less, maybe $8,000 to $10,000. So I would have not spent as much early on. And then the other thing that hands down, no doubt about it, I would have done is this fall we just built a walk-in cooler. I would have had that from day one. I think it's already paid for itself. We've had zero loss. We go to market and we bring stuff home, and we go to restaurants the next day. We can take that stuff with the restaurant to the restaurants on winter. We don't have to harvest on day of or day before and try to pack into marina coolers and keep it cold. We haven't bought any ice in 4 months. So I think the walk-in cooler, I would have done that right away, no doubt about it. And then the other thing I'm really looking forward to, we've never had it in the summer. So I'm looking forward to being able to pick beans and cucumbers and summer squash and peppers and things that need to be picked twice a week. I'm literally looking forward to having everything picked at 2 or 3 times a week, picked at the right size instead of having some a little over, some a little under, and some right size. So, what's our average gross sales for 30 by 96? It's really crop dependent. But what we like to shoot for and what we're shooting for now with scaled up markets, and I think that's really important. You have to say scaled up markets. We couldn't have done it 3 or 4 years ago. We couldn't even have done it maybe 2 years ago, before we started doing a lot of volume with the restaurants. But what we're shooting for gross for 30 by 96 is $17,000 to $20,000. So I'd like to net somewhere around 10. If we could do that, I'd be really happy. I know numbers that we just ran on tomatoes this morning, and that one that Luke put the post up for, the one for the high tunnel budget one, that they're at 10,000 just for tomatoes. The farm that we ran the numbers for that we were out at yesterday, they were at 13,000 for their tomato crop for a 30 by 96, and there's still time for 2 more crops. So I think there's lots of potential, but really important to say you have to have the markets, and in the winter, to grow the winter stuff, you have to have the markets for those too. We can grow it, but if you don't have the market for it in the winter, you don't have any kind of market, it just is going to sit there. So our walk-in cooler is 8 by 10. So I was told by a bunch of people that we should build it bigger when we build it, and I'm already thinking, and I said, no, that'll be fine, and now I'm thinking that it probably could be bigger. What its external dimensions is 8 by 10, and internally with all the insulation in that, it ends up being about 9 by 7. So I would like an 8 by 10 internal space, and maybe bigger. We'll see. But we can move stuff through there now, and it's been good for the potatoes and stuff. So comparison for gross for the same area without a tunnel, I would say, again, it's really crop dependent, but what we think about the tunnels is we're growing 12 months out of the year. With the field, we're growing, for us, more than 6, basically 8 months out of, maybe 7 to 8 months out of the year, depending on where you are in Michigan. So, I would say that it's at least half, that. I think that would be a place to start. And that would be at really intense spacing like we do in the tunnels too. So for our cooler, it cost $4,000, and that was I paid someone $750 to help us build it. It's basically a modified design from the University of Kentucky walk-in cooler one. Since we didn't have a building to build it in, we don't have any other outbuildings besides our chicken coop. In the tunnels, we made it, instead of being 8 by 8, or instead of 8 feet tall, we made it 9.5 feet, 9 feet tall, 9.5 in the front, or 9 in the front and 7.5 in the back. So we could put a sloped roof on it and shingle it to get the snow off of it, so it didn't all just sit right on top of it. So it was $4,000 to do that, and that included the cool bot, which was 300, and it included a $420 or $425 air conditioner unit also. Yeah, so that's a good question, Ben. So that $10 per square foot works out to just about if we have 1,760 square feet of production space, that works out to that 17,500. So I think that's still a good number to shoot for. So and I think again that's with that's with established markets. That's numbers to shoot for. That's moving volume. So it's important to say, and we were shooting for that when we didn't have the markets for it, and we were disappointed every year. So now that we have the markets for it, I'm looking forward to seeing what we do next year on it. And down in that walk-in one, if you just search for University of Kentucky walk-in cooler PDF or something like that, it'll show up. You can find it online. So it's half-inch plywood, and then it's 6-inch 2x6s with 6-inch batten insulation, and then 2-inch foam insulation too on all the walls and the floor and the ceiling. And then it's just plywood, and then it's not painted yet, but it will be painted. And we were gonna side it, but my wife said our house is old wood siding that needs to be painted, and she said the walk-in cooler couldn't look nicer than our house, so it's getting painted this spring instead. Looks like we got a couple people typing here.
Maybe while the questions are coming in, I can take the mic for a second. Thank you to our funders. This is wonderful, wasn't it? I just really was on the edge of my seat the whole time,
Thanks,
and that was for a profit thing. It's always a hard topic, but dang, you did a great job. And thank you to our funders that make it possible for us to pay Adam and other great speakers for sharing their knowledge. They're on here, the screen on the right side. Beginning Farm Rancher Development Program with USDA. The federal grant there. That's on hold now that we don't have a farm bill, or it hasn't been authorized for more funding, so that's unfortunate. But really effective program to help beginning farmers across the nation. But all those other funders are really thankful. We're really thankful to them: the Cedar Tree Foundation, Ag Ranchers Alliance, John Deere, and Cliff Bar. So that's all I wanted to say. Did you have that question? Is that question from Don? Do you want to take that, Adam?
I don't see it yet. See the walking construction.
Yeah.
We might be all right. Any other last-minute questions? What are we storing in the walk-in right now? Potatoes. And I harvested some extra pak choi today and put it in there because it's supposed to get cold again tomorrow, and so in a couple days I want to be able to have something that I can take to the restaurants there that I know they want it already, they said. So, and then we'll get it cleaned out and ready to go for the spring here pretty soon. So, that's a good question, Angie. So how we came up with them was, I kind of had a bunch of scribbles and then said we really need someone that is good and knows what they're doing, and so Laura, who I mentioned at the beginning, went to school for her undergrad is in business, and she has a farming background also. So we hired her in a couple of years ago, well, August of 2011, to be able to work on this kind of stuff. So a lot of the numbers and charts or stuff. A lot of the charts are things that she's created and help me take the numbers that we have and make them make sense. And that's what she does on 2 loan programs with farmers that we work with. That's her main responsibility, is to work on with specific farmers in these loan programs to do that. Oh no, our walk-in's outside. It's just right outside our back door. So it's not built inside anything. So if we had it built in something, then it would, if it was in like a pole barn or if it was something, it would probably, we would just build it flat instead of having to cut each of those 2x6s going down. Hey Laura, good to see you on here. Hope your tunnel's doing well. So everyone's ready to go out and make some money this year, right? So the monthly cost of our walk-in cooler yet we don't know, because it actually hasn't been running very much. We ran it in late September and into October, and then I actually turned it on this morning because it was 20 here yesterday, and now it's 55, and now it's going to be 19 tomorrow night. So I turned it on today, but it doesn't cost very much, and the cooling unit is it's an LG air conditioner, and then the CoolBot. I think it's the biggest one you can get and still have it run off 110. I think it's 17,000 BTUs, or maybe it's 18,000 BTUs, but it's the one that runs off a 110. So there's a good one. Thanks, Jim. So it's about $65 per month. I hope you get some rain and cooler temperatures, Don. I'm sure the Department of Ag wouldn't like it if you tried to sell fried green tomatoes, because they'd be a processed product, right? You need a different license for it. That's one for you. Oh, yeah, Luke's got it.
Yeah, this Farminar will be live, recorded, available at practicalfarmers.org/Farminar, and there's about 60 others up there as well. So you could check out. This is your 4th year, I think, Adam. So you've got 3 other great 90-minute sessions that folks could switch over to.
And if anyone's coming to, I'll be at Mid-Atlantic Fruit and Vegetable Expo on Thursday in Hershey, Pennsylvania, talking about this and some of our loan programs, and then I'll be in Webb City, Missouri on the 4th and 5th of February. So if people are from around those areas and want to meet up or anything like that, and then I'll be at Moses also at the end of February in Wisconsin. So we're talking about similar things to this as well as some other things at all of those. So, but if any of you are out there and you want to track me down and just chat or whatever, I'm happy to talk face to face too. I think with that, I'll say thank you again, and I'm gonna go home and see if my 2 daughters are still awake and see what happens. So thank you guys again so much. It's always fun to do these, and good luck growing this year, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Join us again next week, folks, for another new webinar, and all the way through the end of February, Tuesday night, 7 to 8:30. See ya.
Luke, I expect to see your numbers like this from your new hoop house.